Welcome to Changing Suits. We're your hosts, Bal
and Taj, discussing the latest news, views, and general life for us Western Asians.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
My name's Taj.
Today we've got Dr Kavita Sekhsaria from the Brown Therapist Network. And we're very interested in this subject because we've had a number of listeners ask us about Ayurvedic medicine and more specifically, how it is there to help us in our mental health. So Kavita has got a special interest in this area and we want to explore it. So just before we start, Kavita, can you give us a bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a licensed psychologist in Maryland in the States, and I actually did my dissertation at Rutgers, the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, in Hindu Indian American conceptions of mental health, which was, really such an interesting experience and really validating and fulfilling journey in writing my dissertation to get a better sense of how to give back to the community that raised me, right? But also the community that I grew up feeling like I watched a lot of people suffering more than they needed to, because there was such a misunderstanding of mental health and also a lot of stigma and kind of taboos against being able to seek help. So, I know that growing up, faith was really important to me, and was a source of strength and resilience in a lot of ways. And I wanted to just see if there was a better way to understand what my faith had to say about mental health, because I never really heard anyone talking about that growing up, right? And to see if there was a way to couch kind of how we talk about mental health within kind of a more Eastern religion or more Hindu specifically lens to make it more accessible to more people who I felt were hurting more than necessary, more than
Just in regards to the mental health. So I've got two really important questions from what you've just, well, I've got a lot of questions actually, but we're going to start off with two. What does mental health mean to you? And because you've said that obviously you saw a lot of suffering around you, what was it that mental health then meant to the people around you, and what effects did you see of that?
Yeah, no, these are two really important, really great questions. And while I was doing my research, I thought it was really interesting that there's a lot more definitions of mental illness than there are of mental health. Like, what does it mean to be well and to feel like you're functioning mentally? A lot of people have different things to say about that. I think for me, what comes to mind when I think of mental health is our ability to reach our goals for ourselves.
Oh, that's quite a nice definition there.
Yeah, thank you.
That's kind of set me back because I didn't actually think, mental health, mental illness. I kind of grouped it all together. So it's interesting knowing that they're two separate things.
Yeah, I mean they're sides of a coin in a sense, right? But it can feel important to be able to define, like, what are we striving for? What are we aiming for? Like, we understand what's happening when things aren't going the way they should. We know what illness can look like, but what is the picture of health? And yeah, there's a lot of elements, right? How are we setting our goals for ourselves? Are they realistic? Are they ambitious? Like, are we in a place to think really meaningfully about what we want? And if we are in a place to think meaningfully about what we want, then do we have the capacity, the wellness, right, to strive towards that?
So in regards to mental health, you've given a really lovely definition, but the other thing you said was the people that were around you when you were younger were getting affected by this, as we know, very taboo subject that has a lot of stigma attached to it. Firstly, what is the stigma attached, and what were you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stigma really boils down to the sense that if you're well, if you're strong, then you don't need help from anyone outside of your family, maybe a spiritual leader, possibly like a friend or a community leader, right? Um, and that to turn to someone who's a stranger is a mark of weakness. And particularly my experience is very much grounded in being part of an immigrant community, right? A micro minority, to be honest, in the United States, where people have like really needed to hold on to the idea of being strong in order to survive. And I think it's just particularly difficult for an immigrant population to think about feeling weak. So I think that is a lot of the stigma, and so it manifests in different ways, right? Like feeling like people who are medical doctors but don't appreciate the need of someone who's actually showing symptoms of schizophrenia, or just more broadly some type of psychosis, um, to need mental health resources, and immediately. It looks like this idea of telling people that, like, if you're depressed, it's just because you're not working hard enough, or you're not trying hard enough. Even though, like, we know what a trap depression is and how difficult it makes it to do things that seem so obvious for people who are doing well or do have the resources.
Do you think medical doctors, because I've found in my experience, and this is in the UK and Norway, medical doctors don't still recognise mental health, which is really amazing because there's so much information about it now. But yet, if you've got just an illness, a physical illness, and you show signs of medical health, it's still not treated by a medical doctor in the profession. Is that something that you've come across, or do you think that is true, or maybe just my experience?
No, I think it's very true. And perhaps there is a shift happening generationally, when you see people who are doctors who've been in the field for 30, 40 years versus someone who's graduating medical school now. I will tell you that it seems like there's a difference in what they're being taught and how they approach things to some extent, right?
Well, in that case, are you saying that the newer professionals that are coming out are somewhat better at diagnosing mental health, and therefore, sometimes you go to the doctor and you're, oh, that's a bit of a young doctor there. I don't think they've got the experience. Should we actually be thinking, well, actually, they've probably got a better sense of what I might be going through if it is a mental health issue?
Possibly. And I don't want to paint a too broad brush on all providers. You'll see a lot of differences individually, but I do think overall it seems like just because the research has come so far, right? If you're going to medical school right now, you're learning a lot of things that we just didn't know before about the different ways that anxiety, depression can impact our body and manifest. And I think, a lot of times it's always this funny thing where, yeah, you want a doctor with experience, but you also want a doctor who's like trained in the latest stuff. And that's going to be someone who may be younger. I'm not saying that there aren't experienced doctors who don't do a great job of keeping up, but there
It's
can
so true. Yeah, it's so true. Me and Bao are smiling here because you're like, that is what you think when you go to see a doctor. You want them to have that experience, but yet you want them to have the recent experience with the mental health and stuff like that. So
Because we're really focused on how mental health is affecting South Asians specifically,
Mhm.
what experience are you having now? Again, obviously there's a generational shift from what you were seeing when you were younger and the taboo and stigma attached. But are you in practice seeing a shift in a hopefully positive way as to how clients are also seeing mental health?
Absolutely. Like the fact that I've been able to start a private practice where I'm like 80% of my clients are South Asian at this point, I think is a massive sign that, and I will say of that 80%, 100% tends to be kind of second generation younger folks, right? But there's a much higher level of acceptance of therapy. I was at a dinner party with friends the other day, and there were like 6 of us crowded around the table, and I don't know how this happened, but we all have a therapist, and we all shared that, and it was something I could not imagine happening when I was 14.
Do you think, because we hear this a lot on films, and to be honest, me and my husband, when we come across Americans, not to tar all American people with the same brush, is quite a lot of American people are open to therapy, whereas in the UK, we're very stiff upper lip, I would say, and we wouldn't come out and reveal that we've got a therapist.
If we did, and very low number of people do have therapists in the UK. Yeah, it's a good point, actually. It's a good question.
Do you think it's to do with where you live in the world that makes a difference as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure that has a huge impact, that we're more acculturated, so to speak. And so we've seen our friends be more accepting and more vocal about their therapy journeys. We see our celebrities be far more vocal and open about their um, therapy journeys. And, you know, the field is really advanced in the States in a lot of ways, so it makes sense, right?
We're so keen on, especially what in the UK mainly, of looking after ourselves from the neck down, and we don't even think about what's going on in the fitness and the well-being from our neck up, which is that always stuck with me, and it's such a good point. And well, now talking about it, it's a lot more equalized, isn't it?
Yeah, to the extent that I think you see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, Americans are too much," and like there's just too much therapy. And I've had people tell me that's like it's such a white people thing, like, and white people is a synonym to them for like American, right?
Right.
Because even as I'm sharing, like I've seen such strides, and it's meant so much to me to see that like people are accepting that this is a form of help, and it doesn't make you weaker to be able to access it. It helps you tap into your own strength. Like going to therapy doesn't mean you're asking someone else to fix you. It means you're finding new ways to exercise your own body, right? No one thinks it's lazy to go to a trainer. And I like to think about therapy more closely aligned with physical therapy than like diabetes at times, because for higher functioning people, it resonates with the idea of strength that we were talking about before, right? That it doesn't take away
I
from.
like that comparison. I've never thought of it like that. Like you exercise your body, you go to the gym, and how do you do that with your mind? So that I love that point. Why do you think the older generation felt that they had to be strong? And is it because they didn't have enough time to think about mental health? Because we can't say that they didn't have mental health issues, because they did, just like we do
Absolutely.
today. So what do you think stopped them from seeking, or they didn't have the time or the resources to go to someone to support them, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly a big facet of it is the time, the money, because it was even more expensive. It continues to be expensive to access for a lot of people, right? And more than anything, the mentality that like if you grit your teeth and get through it, it will be so much better than pausing to think about how it's hard, or pausing to think about who you can um, turn to. And perhaps just this idea of when you're feeling discriminated against, that it's even more important to show that you're not weak, to show no signs of being impacted, so that you can keep going. That and just the lack of awareness, right, of a lot of different ways that mental health can manifest. And so, now you see a lot of research showing that, like, it's not about tears and, panic attacks for a lot of South Asians. It's about body aches. It's about jaw pain that comes from grinding your teeth.
God, that makes me think, because my husband grinds his teeth when he's really stressed. That makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
that drives me crazy, the grinding of teeth. That's one sound. You know when kids do it when they're younger, and I know that's a sign to stress
Is that a
sometimes.
sign for kids as well then? That
It's
would be a
known to be
sign.
sometimes as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So now I want to get into the subject because we always do this. We always divert. But the reason we've got you here today is to more specifically talk about Ayurvedic medicine and its function and its importance in mental health. So firstly, what really has given you the specialist interest in Ayurvedic medicine?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about kind of me being very invested in Hinduism and wanting particularly to understand if there are ways to give back to a spiritual community, right? Ayurveda comes forward as like the branch of healing within this world view, right? That is Hinduism. And so I was really interested because I've never heard, a lot of people talking about what mental health looks like in the culture. It's hard to even find words that translate to depression or anxiety. Certainly.
Do you know what? On
Yeah,
that point,
I didn't think of that. Yeah.
it's so what you're saying, and this relates to not only mental health, other things. Sometimes it's a cultural thing where it's the taboo, but in fact, when you look down, and a lot of the South Asian community is spiritual, regardless of whichever religion it is, there is big importance of mental health in all of the religions from the South
Yeah.
Asian community. So that's a really
Yeah.
interesting way of putting it.
Yeah. And, I will say, I almost found the sense of jealousy at times as I was training because I felt like so much research had been done with Christianity certainly for decades, but I was also seeing like some amazing, like inspiring, like I just told you I'm jealous, but I want to say like in a really positive way, like the strides being made in like Muslim mental health and like how you see so many imams being able to talk about how they approach like even thinking about cognitive behavioral therapy through the lens of Islam. But I didn't see a lot of that in the Hindu community, and I thought maybe that's an opportunity to start talking about it because it's such an ancient religion, like, and it can, so many people have talked about the solace they find in different ways of it describing the human condition. Like, surely it had something to say about mental health, even if those words weren't being used.
But the
Right.
nice thing about the Ayurvedic medicine, especially now, where we're seeing it come through in the West as well, is that it is touching a lot of people's lives, and regardless of it's not just Hinduism that it touches, but it's touched on a lot of communities now, hasn't it? And we've definitely seen a massive increase in the UK. I don't know what it's like in the US. I'm assuming it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the thing about Hinduism being a non-proselytizing religion, right? Like there's a sense of like anything that you can access that you can use, like it doesn't matter what you call God or how you believe. Like if you can be a better version of yourself, like by all means, and you can absolutely practice, Ayurveda without needing to go to a temple or whatnot.
A massive thank you to the National Lottery for supporting Changing Suits.
In raising awareness of mental health in the South Asian community. The other interesting thing is we always, in this podcast, as we've developed the podcast, it's always been, we might take out the negatives of, oh, this is what's happening in the South Asian community. And this tends to happen everywhere. You always tend to go to the negative rather than the positive for anything. But the nice thing as we've been doing this is to also realize that not only has the West got such massive benefits that we've seen in our generation, but we've got a lot of rich culture coming from the East, regardless of whichever religion, but the culture is so rich, and that's the nice thing that's coming. The thing with Ayurvedic versus modern day medicine, I'm sure you'll probably have a massive thought process on this, is Western medicine has always been in the research papers. It's always been put at the forefront. However, a lot of the Eastern medicine, whether it's Ayurvedic or whichever strain of medicine is that comes from the East, is usually the basis of what we're talking about in the West anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not, well versed in medicine by any means, but I've certainly heard a lot of people talk about how, like, if you go take the time to like study the principles of Ayurveda, they hold up to like Western science as well. Like, we've all heard that, like, our moms insisting we have haldi, turmeric, when we were little, like, they were right. It genuinely has like anti-inflammatory, antibacterial properties, and that, like, it helps you fight a cold, right? And you see golden lattes everywhere now.
Yeah, I remember our nana, so our mum's father, he used to fight in the army, and for the wounds, they used to put haldi, so turmeric, on the wounds, which I thought was amazing.
You can mix it with oil so it sticks to the wound. Yep.
Yeah, and to think that they used to use it in war-torn times, sort of. And and our parents always insist that if you're not feeling well, you have the haldi milk.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God. But as you grow up, you start appreciating the use of it and how important it is for the body.
So now, we have to listen to our parents on the odd occasion.
Yeah.
In regards to Ayurvedic medicine, I've heard it used quite a lot for physical illnesses, but not so much for mental illness. So mental health, should I say? So how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I just want to preface that a lot of my research comes from the very foundational work of Dr. David Frawley, who also goes by, Vamdev Shastriji, and, encourage everyone very much to read his book Ayurveda and the Mind if they find any piece of this interesting. And he's well versed in Ayurveda as a whole, but he's one of the first people that I found that's really talked about Ayurveda and the mind in a very easy to understand way too. So you said balance, right? And balance is I think the core philosophy of Ayurveda in so many ways. We have, our doshas, and, they're trying to be balanced and I don't want to get too technical into too many terms, but, Ayurveda just really believes that we come from very individual constitutions, and it's important for us to find our balance, which lets us function well. And what works for us to bring us into balance is not going to be the same for another person. And so it takes a really individual reading of how we're made up and what we need, again, to bring us back to balance, right? And so we've probably heard our moms or maybe grandmothers like talk about like, oh, like, that's too hot. Yeah, and so you need something that's more cooling. And they don't mean the food is literally hot, they mean it has like properties in it, like, I think ginger comes to mind as something that's supposed to have a lot of heat and increase, your fire. And maybe mint as something that's more cooling, not because, again, it's not literally cold, but it's supposed to have these properties that it's supposed to soothe and bring that coolness.
Tell us what that means. That's such a good point. What does that mean? Because I talk about it all the time with the kids as well sometimes. So what are they talking about? So it's not the actual heat, it's not the actual cooling in regards to temperature. What is it doing?
Yeah, it's this idea of our digestive fire, right? And that it's this balance between, vata, pitta, kapha, which are the doshas, which are informed by the elements, earth, water, air, and fire. and that like if our digestive fire is too hot, then we're gonna have symptoms like, I don't know, like ulcers or the little, I don't know what the actual correct word is except for chala in Hindi for like the
Yeah.
little sores in your mouth, or other types of physical ailments, versus um, if things are too cold and we need more fire, then maybe we do need some ginger to get us going. Does that start to
Yeah.
make sense?
Mm, mm.
So
Yeah.
what does it do on the opposite side? So I understand the heat does that. So cooling effects. What kind of symptoms would you get in those?
Then you'd see more like lethargy, um, or fatigue or things like that if you don't have the fire.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
The interesting thing is, I was talking to one of my friends who's Chinese, and they believe the same thing. So for some reason, how we came across this conversation as we're sitting in the park, and it is a very old traditional Chinese thing where some foods are hot and some foods are cold. So again, it's we're very much obviously China's not too far from India anyway, but there is that synergy in regards to communities, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and theoretically, right? It's because all of this is built on observation of the human condition, right? And if there is something inherently to fire, then you're going to see it in many different communities across the world because it's accurate, right?
Mm.
Just the way
Mm.
that that many communities around the world knew that the earth was round because the power of observation is true.
So why don't we have that in Western medicine? Because you don't hear about hot and cold food in Western medicine, to be honest.
I think because you're probably, and this is entirely me speculating,
Yeah.
guys, but I think you're looking at things more literally, than seeing maybe these things that are thought about on another realm, right? You can't literally probably measure your the heat of like, whatever the bile inside your stomach or whatever's cooking the food that you're eating. Um, but there's more of this kind of metaphysical idea of it, and it's like true and it works, but if you're trying to necessarily put a microscope to it instead of a different level of observation, it may just look different.
So can I just clarify in my own head, and this is just to understand because I think this whole garam and cool thing is I talk about it, so I want to understand it. So it's not quite. Is it looking at energy levels? Because in Western medicine, I remember quite a while ago during school where we'd have some, I think it was bread or something. We'd burn that, and it gives off energy, and there was a whole thing as to how much energy it gives off. So again, Western society understands there's different energy within different types of food. Am I getting that correct? That is, the hot and cold is looking at the energy. Is that
Yeah, from
yeah?
what I understand,
Okay.
absolutely. It's all about energy, right? And how we're translating it. And so like I want to be sure also I talk about the mental picture of this as I'm trying to speak to the physical picture, right? That there's also this idea um of balance and like the energy that we're getting like more subtly, right? These are the subtle ones, and vata pitta kapha, or the more um tangible, concrete ones that deal with our food. We have prana, tejas, and ojas, and those are more formed by um, how we're taking in things like conversations, feelings with friends, like the environments we're surrounding ourselves with.
So food
And
for thought rather than physical food. It's food for thought.
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. And the
Mm.
idea that like what like Ayurvedic therapy can start to look like is, what environments are you placing yourself in? But then, and like, do you need better balance? to be able to feel well and to be able to feel like you're taking it in and digesting it and getting the energy from it that you want, right? And what is your power over your mind, and how you maybe reframe things, or how you take them in so that you can transform them into what you need, and finding balance in that.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Okay, so if you had a client who comes in and there is some kind of mental health issue there, how would you use Ayurvedic medicine to treat them?
Yeah, so in practice, to be honest, and I'm a more dynamic than cognitive behavioral therapist, I will say, and so maybe that's a part of it. Though I think all of it works together well and is important.
What do you mean by dynamic?
Yeah, so psychodynamic is a different school of psychotherapy, started by Sigmund Freud, and I believe that while cognitive behavioral therapy is more concrete in talking about your cognitions and your behaviors and how you can alter them to meet your goals, psychodynamic therapy is more about understanding how relationships are impacting you, how the past, how your emotions may be manifesting, and the idea that as you build insight into what you're feeling, where it's coming from, and why, that insight will allow you then to make choices that bring your life more in line with your goals than otherwise. So it's more exploratory, more free-flowing than structured types of therapy.
So if a client was sitting in front of you, and
Yeah.
going back to my previous question, how would you use your, I suppose you'd be using both the West and the fact that you have an especial interest in Ayurvedic. How would you treat them then?
Yeah, so it's not so different from what we would expect, but the idea is to start with an assessment, to understand, like, how is your life? How are all the areas of your life? How are you feeling about them? How's work, but how's your friends? Like, where are you getting fulfillment and where are you struggling? And then in understanding that, right, trying to understand where there may not be balance, where things may feel they're distressing and they're challenging, and slowly doing work to unpack, like, what is the imbalance here? What am I getting too much of? What am I not getting that I need? And how can I accept that, and work towards addressing that so that I can tap into my full resiliency, tap into my full strength. Like all good therapy, there's, making sure that your physical body is well too, as you want to take care of your mental health, right? Like, how are you eating? Are you going to the doctor to make sure, like, you're catching any big issues physically? Are you getting exercise? Are you drinking water?
Do you think with the fact that you do Ayurvedic medicine, that you do tend to touch a bit more than maybe other therapists on the spiritual side, whichever spiritual belief anyone or that your client has, whichever religion they follow, if a religion or spirituality generally, do you tend to touch on
I
that
think
a bit more
so.
than other therapists?
I think so, though, to be fair, these days when you talk to therapists, they're all interested in the idea, but I don't know how many people are, in their first intake session saying, like, are you spiritual, or what's your relationship with faith if you have one? And then going from there, and whatever a client says, because my clients are I said they're very South Asian, but they're very diverse in terms of faith and their relationship to it. To some of them it's a source of strength, but to be honest, to a lot of other people it can be a source of distress, of a struggle to understand and cope with too. And I think my goal is always just to help them understand, like if they need something that faith can give them that they're having trouble accessing, like how do you do that? And if they need space from it because it's causing distress, then how can they put themselves in position to do that, right?
The whole concept. So I did a bit of reading around, because I don't know enough about Ayurvedic. It's always been something that's, my parents have done a lot of reading into, whether it's homeopathic, whether it's a very Eastern type of medicine. And it's always been an interest, but I haven't gone into it. But anyway, I did some research, and and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was the concept of mind, body, and soul. And I suppose we're talking really about the soul there. Because as you were talking, I was like, actually, is that the question I should be asking? Or are we more focused? You've spoken about the body. Now it's back to the mind. So what is it that you do in regards to the mind? We've spoken about spirituality. Some people, you go down that route. Some people you don't. Body, we've always got that physical fitness. But then how do you conquer that mind aspect being a therapist?
Yeah, no, I think everything we've talked about comes back to the mind, and the soul is on another level. But if you think about it, like you have to take care of your body first, then to take care of your mind. Like you cannot treat your depression while you're starving, right? You cannot work through anxiety if you're in existential fear of like being beat up. Like it's not possible. And you can't think about your spiritual journey until you feel like you have some semblance of control. It feels like such a harsh word, but at least some understanding of your mind and how it's working and what it needs.
So it tends to have a flow, sort your body side out of it, then it tends to be mind, and then spirituality, if that's where you want to go. Okay.
People get to a level where they're able to transcend their body, able to transcend their mind. But you need to at least, you have to start there, even if you can flow backwards at some, higher level of enlightenment. But yeah.
So, like Bal said, in our family, we have looked into Ayurvedic medicines for physical reasons. But with Ayurvedic, is it a slower process rather than Western medicines?
It can be, right? Because in a lot of ways, Ayurveda is so individual that it tries to avoid side effects, right? And I think that means that inherently it's going to be a slower process. I'm not saying there won't ever be side effects if you overdose on haldi, but it's much harder to do than like with Tylenol, right? And I think it's just a process of like, you're constantly tuning and you're constantly working on yourself, not waiting for something to flare up and then you need something big to address that.
So you take the Ayurvedic medicine almost before the big issue happens?
It's all about prevention, right?
It's like taking vitamins.
But in such a mindful way, right? Like you're not taking the same vitamins every day because you need something different. And it's so much easier to just pop your multivitamin. I'm not saying I don't, I definitely do, right? But like people who really are taking Ayurveda into account in their diet, it's something you think about every day, every meal. What do I need? What's out of balance so that I can treat myself and continue to take care of myself? And then, is there a long-standing issue like that I need to address slowly over time to be able to address that imbalance? Or, am I just today I need some extra ginger? No, actually I need some mint.
So Ayurvedic, it's not, because in my mind I'm thinking a tablet or syrup or something like that. It's it's not necessarily that. It can be food as well.
Yeah, your bhindi ki sabji, your okra, it can be made with Ayurvedic
Not my favorite
principles.
sabji, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not mine, even though I just had a whole plate full of it just now.
That's so interesting. I think I've just grown up thinking that like bhindi ki sabji is the like is a favorite, but
Oh no, it's never been my favorite.
Maybe it's a
it's
UK
just the Sekhsaria family. Yeah.
Obviously, the way I make it.
So that's
You need the
interesting.
onions. But yeah, no, it's like it's whatever you're eating. Food is medicine
Right.
is very Ayurvedic an idea, right? It's you can they've tried to make things more commercial without question. So you'll find tablets for the things that are, a little more bitter, a little bit harder to chew, but
I gotta find a tablet for Pindia then. Like I
yeah.
said, I've got that.
So basically, that's why you would ask a client about their diet, because then you would kind of steer them into eating the right sabji and the right dala and stuff like that.
Well, personally, no, I'm not well versed enough. I just had a very amazing experience going to a person who had both an MD and decades of experience in Ayurveda, and the way that she assessed me and the way that she asked about my whole well-being, I thought was really, really informative, because I think it's a loss if a doctor is looking at your health and doesn't know that your entire diet is Capri Sun and Cheetos, right? Like that, that might be why you're struggling. And so, no, I don't sit with my clients and say okay, I think you need some pindi today. But I am saying hey, how are you feeling about the quality of your meals? And if they're I just have been scarfing down my food, whatever, 5-minute meal I can pop in the microwave, we're not going to talk about exactly the property of that food, but we're going to talk about what is that doing to you? How is that feeling? And what's in your power to do something different about, because it can really change how you feel to feel good about what you're consuming.
The interesting thing is, I've started reading a book, and it's really brought. It's quite scary as to how we do get drawn away from certain things that we know are healthy. We know that the environment's good for us. However, we think it's very backwards if we've got environmentalists who are trying to look after us. Same thing with what you've just said. Doctors don't tend to go down the diet route. However, we know that diet has a massive impact on our health. So it really does bring it back as to why are we in this cycle where we think these questions are, and I'm going to put speech marks there, backwards by asking these questions, because it completely isn't. The science is behind it, where we should be looking after these things. However, we're shown in a world that it's a negative if we do talk about diet, if we do talk about, apart from physical health, which is very much in the forefront of everyone's mind. So the things that you've just said there really have sort of struck a chord there as to we do need to be looking after. The problem obviously being, how much time do we have to do this? And I know that my food is one of the last things I think about, which is why I made bindiyan today. But it does tend to be that thing of you're running around in a crazy day where we don't actually look after ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think I will try to control myself from ranting about this subject, but I do think capitalism, and the sense of internalized capitalism, which is maybe a newer word, but it's this idea that we draw our own worth by our productivity and what we're giving.
We won't go down to the capitalism, because that is a book that I'm reading about. So we'll do that in another podcast, Kavita. Let's stick to Ayurvedic today. It's just because you said it, and I was like, you know what? That's just struck a chord from what I was reading yesterday. That's the only reason I mentioned it.
Yeah, and just to tie the loop, right? I think capitalism affects how medicine is practiced, though there's people who are trying to change that, right? And move from more of a treatment model to a prevention model. And when you go towards a prevention model, inevitably you have to ask about these things. I will say that I have found a general practitioner, a primary care provider, who takes the time to ask me how I'm eating. And I know that she has a better sense of my health and wellness because she does that.
Send them to the UK, because our GPs have not got the time.
Yeah.
Which is not their fault.
It's not, right. Yeah. But I think there's the capacity is there, and us being mindful ourselves of like seeking out people who appreciate that will help us take care of our wellness too, right?
I'm gonna do a bit of a divergent, but it comes back to whether we do go down whichever path we, because you've said the Ayurvedic as well as homeopathic as well as a lot of the other Eastern medicines, and you can tell that I don't know many of the other medicines because I keep bringing up those two.
That's okay.
Tend to take longer. However, us being South Asians, and I'm going to tar us with the same brush, we do like to keep a hold of the pennies that we've made, and if it does tend to take a bit longer, we tend to steer away from it sometimes, and that is also a problem, especially when you are looking at prevention rather than cure. And a lot of us, I mean, we've been through it with our own family where we are quite, there's medical problems that are quite severe, and that's when you start thinking, actually, maybe I do need to look at another type of medicine because Western medicine isn't working here. What would you say to the South Asians who aren't looking at prevention because perhaps they are either looking after their pennies, or they haven't thought about prevention, or they don't think about their food because they haven't got the time? What's your advice for those, for us? I'm going to say us.
Yeah.
It's a tough one there. I gave you quite a long one.
Cost you more. Without question, it costs us more not to take care of ourselves on a daily basis. Like if you allow yourself to get to a place where you've ignored something for so long, it's going to cost you more than it would to work half an hour less every day.
I love that reply. That's a good reply.
I think it was short but really concise and captured it for me, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a good reply. I like that. And you didn't even know that question was coming. Where are you? Because obviously you're based in the US. What do you find with the clients that you're seeing, and not only about Ayurvedic medicine, but looking at mental health? Is there a difference between your Asian and non-Asian clients that you're seeing in regards to mental health and how they see mental health now?
Okay, so the people who are coming through my door automatically have battled their own level of stigma, right? So they're going to be different than the general South Asian population. And so it's a sampling problem, right? Where everyone who I'm working with, I appeal to them for some reason, and they have decided that therapy is worth their time. And so they believe in it, right? That's not overall true. And because, yes, the community has made strides. You see a lot of people being more accepting of therapy. But I think one of the most touching points of the research that I did was seeing that even people who are mental health professionals, if they're Indian and Hindu American, they're less likely to seek their own therapy than the general population of mental health providers. So people who put themselves on this path are still dealing with the stigma, right? And are still struggling with accepting that it's okay for you personally to need a little bit of help. They believe in therapy for their clients, for their families, for their friends. But personally taking it in can still be hard. But I think we're growing in our ability to talk about what it means and see each other doing it and accepting that.
It's a saying, isn't it? Do as I say, but what is it?
Not as I do.
Not as I do. Yeah.
Okay. As we come to a close for this podcast, can you give our listeners a bit of advice in regards to their mental health? And if you can talk about a bit of the Ayurvedic medicine, that would be great, because that was the topic here. But if you can't, that's fine. But just a few sentences so that we do all look after ourselves, because we do want to break through this stigma of mental health and raise awareness for ourselves and our community.
Yeah. Find your balance. To balance, you need to be able to really work your muscles, right? Whatever that means. And so it's hard to speak broadly because each one of you who's listening are dealing with something else. But I imagine something will resonate when you think about the idea of balance and where you're not feeling it and where you need to build yourself up to be able to hold things steadier.
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kavita. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've learned so much, and I will continue my research into Ayurvedic medicine because it is such a massive, massive field. It has been great. So thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I've really, really enjoyed our conversation.
Lovely. So that's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.